we're looking for a hero today, and let's see if we can find him. Okay, just want to start by I'm going to do this every week for a while, but I just want to say once again that Hadar is doing its first Tanakh intensive. For those of you who like studying not just Torah but the rest of our Hebrew Bible, and that's January 12th through the 15th at Hadar. For those of us here on the West Coast, it means flying across the country, but I'm going to do that, so come with me. And if you're already closer to New York, then it's a great opportunity. And for those of us who are here on the West Coast, I want to mention again that next Thursday, the 20th, at the Workman Circle, we're going to begin a monthly Beit Midrash series studying principles of justice as they emerge in the Talmud, especially in the section of the Talmud known as Nizikin, damages, all of the civic laws, the court laws, the punishment laws. That's the kind of material that we're going to be looking at. So join me next. I think I will actually put that I'm going to put a little, or maybe Danny, you can do that for us. Put a link to that in the chat. Speaking of the links, I have one technical difficulty that I'm just you don't have a source sheet because there's something wrong. I'm going to be able to share with you my source sheet, but there's something wrong with the document that it shows it's too complicated to explain, but it's not allowing me to share the document. So I haven't figured out how to get the link to you, and I will get it to you. We will put it in the folder that we usually put it in after this class once I figure this out, but you're not going to have your own copy. I'll share it, and I think that should work out fine, but I'm not sure why it's not working. Okay. Um, uh, Frantically trying to figure that out before the class, so I'm a little bit discombobulated. So let's just take a breath. Part of the reason that we say blessings before we do mitzvot is to bring our presence of mind and consciousness into the mitzvah. We say a blessing before Torah study because Torah study is a mitzvah. And so I need it, and maybe some of you do too. Let's just take a moment and center ourselves. Take a deep breath or two, and then thank God for the opportunity to study Torah together in this way. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so we have been looking so far this year at a particular theme as we move through the book of Genesis, and the theme is informed by this Tanakh intensive that I've just mentioned. The theme that we're looking at is leadership and power, and those questions of leadership and power become very, very big in the middle section of Tanakh. That will be much of the focus in that intensive, is looking at the first books of the prophets and how they account for the rise of the monarchy and then the fall of the monarchy, with lots of drama and glory and tragedy along the way. That kind of conversation belongs naturally in those books. It seems like that's what those books are about, politics. We don't think of those themes as immediately when we're in the book of Genesis, which seems like, before the world divided up into power structures and nations. And, Genesis is just the story of the early humans and their families and their personal struggles. That is the way at least I tend to think about Genesis, and especially in contrast to Exodus, which immediately is embroiled in all of these questions of power and pharaohs and monarchs and resistance and all of that. But we have been in these first few weeks tracking the theme of leadership and power, and finding that actually there's quite a bit in the book of Genesis, that the first kings are beginning to arise already in the second reading of the Torah, in the book of in Parshat Noach. And then by the time we get to Abraham's story, kings are everywhere. most notably in the first parsha of Abraham's story, Abraham goes to battle with 4 kings against 5 kings, or 5 kings against 4 kings, and is is in the midst of all of this sort of political negotiation, military negotiation. Avraham, who himself is not a king, is not an official in any way, is just a guy. Not just a guy, after all, the guy who receives the call from God, but Abraham's relationship, immediate connection to all of these monarchs and potentates and just figures of power um, is noteworthy. We noted it, and then we continued last week to look at Avram's interaction with kings, actual kings, and there are some notable kings that arise immediately, and one of them is the Pharaoh. That's the first king that Avram is dealing with, and the Pharaoh, of course, will be the ultimate sort of paradigm of an evil king once we get to the book of Exodus. So that's been interesting so far. We've been tracking that, and now we're in Parshat Hayyei Sarah, the life of Sarah, so named because Sarah, Abraham's wife, has just died. And there are no kings in this parsha, but there are leaders and negotiations, and this is going to be an opportunity to see Avram continuing to have to deal with um, 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 international relations, so to speak, with like negotiations with other tribes and peoples. And now we're gonna take a look at what unofficial or low-level leadership looks like, tribal leadership looks like, and how Avram is going to deal with that. In other words, our question today is, in the absence of all-powerful king-like figures, what other kinds of leaders do we see, political leaders do we see in the Torah? And since we've already noticed Abraham negotiating and dealing with mighty leaders, what is the difference here in this scene that we're about to take a look at, where Avram seems to be dealing with a much smaller local leader? And the scene that we're going to look at is the purchase of land from the Hittites, and in particular from a guy named Ephron. And there's Avram wants to bury Sarah, and just to in general secure a burial plot for his family, and so he offers to purchase land, and soon enough he's put into contact um, with a man who seems to be the local leader. Okay, so that's what we're going to take a look at today, is the interaction between Avram, who is an unofficial leader, and Ephron, who is also an unofficial leader, or at least we don't have an official title for Ephron. Who is this guy? And so we'll see in this scene how both of them emerge as representatives or leaders of their of their side in the negotiation. So let's take a look now at Genesis chapter 23. We're going to look at that chapter and just sort of notice some of the issues that come up, and then we will start looking into the commentaries to see how they highlight little notes of leadership on either side of this negotiation. Okay, and by the end, I hope we're going to get to a really really interesting and important piece of Torah commentary from a fairly modern commentator who is going to really lay out for us some models of leadership. Okay, so we're gonna start in the story, and we're gonna end up in kind of political theory. Okay, so let's take a look at the story first. And here is the text that I wish I could share with you, but for some reason today it's not sharing. Okay, this is Genesis chapter 3. Vayu Hayyei Sarah mea shana ve'esrim shana ve'sheva shanim shnei Hayyei Sarah. Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of Sarah's life. It's a kind of a repetitive first verse there. And Abraham now comes in to deal with this death. So Sarah died in Kiryat Arba. He Hebron, which is what is now Hebron, and that is the case in what is now Hebron. Sarah and the burial plot we're going to be talking about. That's where it is in the land of Canaan. And Avram proceeded to mourn for Sarah and to bewail her. Really, this is just to cry for her, to bewail her, cry for her, and this is like that language, lifkota. Then Avram rose behind, but this is very brief. Abraham mourns Sarah. This is like one of our primary texts around mourning, what it means to mourn someone, and the language of hesped or eulogy is here. Lispod l'Sarah. Okay, so that's interesting in itself. But let's move on from there and see Avram then get to the business of dealing with the burial itself. Avram rose beside his dead and spoke to the Hittites. And he said, I am a ger toshav, a stranger resident. Okay, this is like an interesting phrase that we can spend some time interpreting, but he describes himself as someone who is very much not an official in this region. In fact, he's just someone who is temporarily there, a ger toshav, a stranger who resides, or maybe permanently there, but not integrated into the society. Ger v'toshav anochi imachem. Tnuli achozat kever imachem. Give me a burial site among you that I can remove my dead for burial. And the Hittites replied to Abraham and said to him, Shma'enu Adoni Nasi Elohim Ata betochenu. Listen to us, my Lord. You are a chief of God among us. Okay, we're going to spend a lot of time thinking about this phrase, you are a chief of God among us, because that is a very nice thing to say. Oh, you seem like a really godly man, but it's a weird phrase. This word nasi we now use in modern Hebrew to mean president. Probably in ancient Hebrew, that's not exactly the right translation, so I'm using chief or chieftain. It's sometimes translated as some kind of official position, but in this case, a chief of God. What does that mean? Okay. Now, the other thing that I want to just note as we read through the rest of this is this first phrase, hear us, my Lord, Shma'enu Adoni. That language of listening, like we're going to read now through the scene, that language of listening or hearing is the driving word, the sort of what they call like a milat mancha, like a key word that we will see appear again and again and again in this scene. Everybody is trying to get everybody else to listen to them. Okay, so so just note this. Hear us, my Lord, you are chief of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. None of us will withhold his burial place from you for burying your dead. Avram bowed low to the landowning citizens, the Hittites, and he said to them, if it is your wish that I am able to bury my dead, hear me, Shma'uni, and intercede with me with Ephron, son of Tzochar. Now, okay, the Hittites seem to welcome Avram taking some land. They say you can bury your dead wherever you want, but Avram says, actually, I'd like to speak directly to Ephron ben Tzochar, and the reason is because I want the land that he has. Let him sell me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns, which is at the edge of his land. Let him sell it to me at the full price for a burial site in your midst. Okay, so it seems like the Hittites just say, just find a piece of land that's fine. You can bury your dead here. And Avram says, no, I want a very specific piece of land, and that's why I need to talk to this guy Ephron because he owns that cave, and I want that cave. Okay, simple enough. But then, as Avram begins to speak to Ephron, we get the sense that Avram is dealing with not just a guy that owns the land, but some kind of more authoritative voice in the community. So let's see what happens there. Ephron was dwelling among the Hittites. That's interesting because that language of dwelling among the Hittites makes it sound like maybe he wasn't a Hittite, but like Avram was dwelling among the Hittites. So Ephron the Hittite answered Avram in earshot of the Hittites. And, I told you to pay attention to listening. And here you can see in the ears of the Hittites, like lots of language of everybody listening to one another. And that seems to be important here. So Ephron the Hittite answered Avram in earshot of the Hittites and to all the assembled at his city's gate. That's an official position. Sha'ar Iro. That's like usually where the judge or the magistrate would sit, is at the city gate. Okay, so that seems important, at his city's gate. Just to explain that for one more second, in Parashat Shoftim, in Deuteronomy, where we discuss judges, it says, Shoftim v'shotrim titnu lecha b'chol sharecha. You shall place judges and officers in all of your gates. Okay, so that is a term used in the Torah to mean the sort of like city hall or something like that. Okay. All right. So there's a huge assembly. Why is there an assembly? Why are people listening in anyway? Why is this a big public event? That question begins to take us into this dynamic that I want to explore with you, where it isn't just a negotiation between two people, it's some kind of larger negotiation on behalf of a community. Oh, okay. So Ephron says, no, my lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead. Okay, so that sounds nice. Avram wants that land, and guess what? Ephron says, you can have it. Free, no problem. But Avram doesn't want anything for free. And we know that because in one of the previous negotiations that Avram was engaged in with the king of Sodom, Avram was insistent on returning to the king after the war, returning to the king of Sodom all that he had captured, and so that he didn't benefit at all wasn't paid in any way for the mission because he didn't want to be in debt to the king of Sodom. Okay, that's important. Avram there's a continuing theme here. Avram doesn't want to be in anyone's debt. He doesn't want to owe, especially men of power. He doesn't want to be in their debt. And that in itself is a theme that we should note. Oh, Avram is suspicious about getting too indebted to owe favors to men of power. Okay. All right. So Ephron offers him the cave for free, but Avram bowed low before the people of the land and spoke to Ephron in earshot of the people. Again, ba'oznei am haaretz. And he said, if only you would hear me out. Achimatalu shma'eni. Just listen to me. Like nobody's listening. Everybody's asking everybody else to listen to them, but it seems nobody is listening. If only you would hear me. Let me pay the price of the land and accept it from me so that I can bury my dead there. So Avram insists, I really do want to pay. And the next line is the one that always brings a smile to my face. This is like a very funny line because Ephron replies and says to Avram, Adoni shma'eni, eretz arba me'ot shekel kesef beini uveincha mahi. My lord, hear me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Go and bury your dead. Okay, this is a very funny line because like you begin to suspect that Ephron is not like a plain dealer, Like Ephron says, you could just keep it, you can have the land. I just wanted you to give it to you. Avram is suspicious. No, I don't want to be in your debt. Let me pay for it. And immediately Ephron says, okay, 400 silver shekel, that's nothing, sure. Like he has the number in mind right there, and he names it as just no big deal. Like what's 400 shekels between friends, right? I will tell you that I looked it up, and 400 silver shekels is the largest amount of money mentioned in the Torah. That's interesting, right? He's like, what is it between, you and me? We'll just 400 silver shekels, no big deal. To give you a sense of it, Joseph is sold to Egypt for 20 shekels. Okay? Like 400 silver shekels is a lot of money. And here Efron is sort of just okay, fine. You want to buy it? This is exactly what it costs. It actually costs quite a lot of money, and but no big deal, right? So there's something a little funny about this language, and it gets more suspicious as we go on. So we'll just finish the scene here. What is 400 shekels between you and me? Go and bury your dead. So now, interestingly, Avram heard Ephron. That's interesting because we've been hearing this, or we've been noticing this language of hear me. And then finally, Avram heard Ephron, as if to say, and this word in Hebrew, shema, means listen, but it also means understand. Like he got it. Now he understood something. Okay. So Avram heard Ephron, he understood Ephron, and Avram paid out to Ephron the money that he had named in earshot of the Hittites. So important, it seems, that the Hittites hear what's going on. And then listen to this language. 400 shekels of silver converted to the merchant's rate. All right, here it is. Arba me'ot shekel kesef over lesocher. Now, why do we have this phrase here? I don't know, converted to the merchant's rate. So the Talmud, um, is also suspicious of Ephron here. Talmud feels like there's something not right. There's something about this negotiation. It seems friendly, but behind it, there's tension and there's scheming and there's interest, right? So the Talmud says a very complicated technical thing, which like I don't want to get too deep into, but I'll just show you what the Talmud says about it. The Talmud says, from where do we derive the principle that the wicked say much but do not even do a little? We derive it from Ephron, who initially it's written that he said, a piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between me and you? But in the end, it is written, and Avram listened to Avram and weighed out the silver, 400 shekels of silver, converted to the merchant's rate. What does that mean, converted to the merchant's rate? It means that shekels could be used in any location, but there's another kind of coin, a centaria, cantare, which was a more universal currency. And Ephron insisted that it be converted to the more universal currency, which is actually worth a little bit more. So that's what the Talmud makes of this extra phrasing, converted to the merchant's rate. As if to say, that's very technical, but it's as if to say, Ephron sounds like he's saying, hey, 400 shekels, no big deal. But then when it comes down to negotiation, he says, actually, why don't you sign on this paper and we're going to convert it to the standard merchant's rate so I can make sure to get all my money and you pay like a fee for the conversion. And, all of a sudden it's very, very strict negotiation. So this sounds very technical, but the Talmud is playing on that extra phrase, over lesocher. Like, why is that there? And that is a little bit of a clue that where once we started with, you could just have it for free. Now it's getting very specific and very technical. Okay. Joe Schwartz tells us that would be $125 in today's currency, 400 shekels, right? If you converted Israel, right? But the well, I will get into the technicalities. I already said 400 shekels is the largest money amount named in the Torah. An adult male on the slave market in the Torah goes for 50 shekels. A healthy adult male on the slave market. Okay. Hate to mention the slave market, but such things are discussed. Okay. So I hope that you feel, as the Talmud does, a little suspicious of Ephron. Who is this guy? Who is this guy? And what do we make of all of his wheeling and dealing here? So let me pause here. I want to begin to answer that question with the help of some of the commentaries, but let me take a pause here and just hear, like, what do you think of this? I've noted a number of things here. I've noted that everybody's asking everybody to listen or to hear or to understand. It's important that this takes place in the public sphere. I've noted that Ephron seems to be some kind of important represent where once he seemed to be just the guy who owned the cave, now he's doing like a whole negotiation and he's doing it in front of all the people. There's something about Ephron that seems like he has a lot of power. Um, and I've noted the suspicion that we feel that the reader inevitably feels when they hear Ephron seems so breezy about the land and then also all of a sudden so very precise about it. So let's just take some first readings of this scene, and then we'll look at a couple of commentaries that highlight, as I suggested at the outset, the leadership roles being taken by each of these players. Let's start with Rich.
So I once heard an interpretation of this whole episode as the difference between purchasing a burial site to just bury the body and the difference between that and the outright purchase of land. And that Abraham and Ephron are talking past each other. And that's the Shmauni, listen to me, listen to me. It's going to be a legal transaction. They do it in front of the court. And so their listening is important. And so when Ephron says, I'm going to give it to you for free, Avram says, no, no, he must mean I'm just going to dump the body. I want to be able to have this as a burial site for generation. I want to own the land. And then the penny drops for Ephron and he goes, oh, you want to buy the whole thing? Well, okay, what's $400 or shekels, between friends? And so if we're going to sell you the full property rights, that's the cost. And, let's account for it with, we're going to do this as a real, meticulous transaction. We're going to convert, Philistine shekels to like, the regularly accepted ones, et cetera. So they are talking past each other. So it gives flavor to the Shmauni.
Good. Okay, that's a very nice uh, examination of the dialogue. Rich is making sense for us of why the back and forth. And all I want to add is just to highlight that the landscape that Rich is describing presumes not a tremendous amount of power invested in Ephron or in Avram in particular, but a kind of backdrop of a communal authority. These words have to be said in the ears of all because there's some official process. This isn't just a negotiation between two people. We see that kind of thing in the Torah as well. There's some kind of, call it the courts, call it the community. There's some power or authorization that needs to be granted to legitimize this transaction, and so it's important that they be heard. So when we're thinking about power structures, where is the power structure? It's not clear, but it's somewhere in the listening ear of the community. Okay, that's an interesting way to start to think about this. Ariella?
Well, my thought is that there is something about this discussion having to be in the public sphere versus the private, like just between you and me, or you and Leia, or me and Leia. It has a different power dynamic because now we're bringing in the community.
Indeed. Indeed. Yeah, great. Well said. Nancy.
The Torah has a habit of presenting us with eternal truths and asking us to pay attention and learn from them. In today's world, we're being accused of stealing the land.
Mm.
If you listen to the hostages, when they do mention it, every single one of them says that their captors told them, you've stolen the land. And here we have irrefutable proof. We have a deed in the Torah, in the Bible, a book that millions, billions, I don't know how many people believe in, and it's right there. So I'm not sure what the message is other than
Right. All right, great. So I appreciate that reflection. Let's just like pull back a little bit and just, just to sort of extract from Nancy's comments some really important, like fundamental principles that we see at play here. And one is that land and power are related topics. To own land is to have power. To have power is often to have claim to land, to claim to give up or to possess, but control over the land is one of, if we begin to talk about leadership and power, part of what we're talking about is territory. So that's important. And it's also true that the Torah seems to be concerned, and certainly Jewish tradition and its commentaries are concerned right from the start with how will the Israelite claim to the land be established when in fact other people are on the land. Okay, so Avram purchased this, although this is one burial plot. But, from the start of the Torah, Rashi's first comment on the Torah is, oh, God created the world, and so God can give the land to whomever God wishes. That's a famous example of this theme of looking for ways in which, even in the early chapters of Genesis, the question of the land and claim to the land is being not just promised by God, but somehow established in a way that we can keep track of. Okay, so it is no surprise then that we're talking about land and land rights here as we begin to think about power. Okay, let's take one more comment from Leah.
That song, Smiling Faces. We see this over and over again. It starts with the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Lot, so friendly, but actually he's a wheeler and dealer, and he's self-serving in terms of the land that he takes when he splits off from Abraham. And we see this in Laban too, who basically enslaves Jacob, but so sleazy, so smiling, so smooth. So this is like it's a quality that we have that is repeated over and over again as a theme.
Yeah. I was thinking also about Lavan and Jacob's dealings with Lavan, his father-in-law. The way there seems to be this very smiling faces, as you say, this very friendly overture, but then suddenly it's all business. And that dynamic that Leah's really highlighting here, that is part of what we are thinking about when we ask the question, how is Avram dealing with local leadership? Like, there's some etiquette of polite discourse, of respectful, how does one speak to the local magistrate in a term that denotes friendship. There are certain like codes of discourse, and at the same time one always has to be suspicious of what lies underneath that. What is actually the hidden message? What are they really thinking? There are lots of stories like this. There's a great book by James Clavell, Shogun, and it was turned into a series recently. And it's also dealing with hidden negotiations, manipulations. There's like a way that leaders talk about things in public, and then there's the actual behind the scenes. We continue to see that kind of dual messaging. Okay, this is all very good as a start. I want to now begin to look at Ephron and Avram in particular. And when it comes to Ephron, so far, he has not been established as a leader or a particular leader of any title. He just happens to own the plot of land. But there does seem to be something in his personage here that carries a great deal of authority. And the rabbis pick up on this, and I want to just cite Rashi's commentary, where Rashi says, oh yes, Ephron, remember earlier we noted that it said Ephron was dwelling among the Hittites. It's sort of a strange language here. Ephron was dwelling among the Hittites. Like, why does it say that? Of course, like Ephron's there. Was he a not? But he is a Hittite. It sounds like he's not a Hittite, but he's dwelling amongst the Hittites. So it's weird language, right? Ephron was dwelling among the Hittites, so Ephron the Hittite. Like, what is this dwelling among the Hittites about? So Rashi picks up on that and says, Ephron was dwelling, but the verb is written without a vav, so that it could be read as not Yoshev, but Yashav, which means he sat. And thus indicating that on that very day, they had appointed him to be an officer over them. Oto hayom minuhu shoter alehem. On that very day, they had appointed them to be an officer over them. Why? Mipnei chashivuto shel Avraham shehaya tzarich lo ala legdula. Because of the high standing of Avraham, who needed to negotiate with him, he was elevated to a high position. Okay, so they're playing on that language of, oh, and Avram sat among the Hittites, meaning they sat him down in his new position that very day because they scrambled and realized we need a representative. We need some kind of authority figure. So they granted him a title. And the reason they granted him a title is because here it's Avram coming, and Avram is such an esteemed person of stature that, and this also is an insight into, political negotiations, we need to have a leader to match Avram, to speak to Avram, because we need someone with stature to speak to someone with stature. That's like just a small note, but you can hear the rabbis also trying to figure out what power does Ephron have? Why does it seem like suddenly he's negotiating as a representative? And so the rabbi's kind of reading in, he must have been given some official title. But in the midst of all of that, part of what the rabbis are telling us is that Avram was not an official leader, but had some kind of status. Now, remember, Avram went to battle as an ally of all of these kings and has already negotiated with kings. So what is Avram in this period? What is he's not an official leader, but there seems to be some kind of great status he carries, okay? And we saw, even in the text, this isn't just rabbinic speculation. We saw in the text Avram being named as someone with status. We noted this at the outset. What was the phrase that we saw it seemed to give Avram special status? It was the phrase Nasi Elohim, a chief of God. What does that mean? A chief of God. Is Abraham a chief? And is he special? Is he spiritual chief? What exactly does that term refer to? Okay, so here I want to bring you to the most interesting, exciting piece of commentary I came across this week from a commentary called Ha'emek Davar, that was written in the 1800s by the last Rosh Yeshiva of the great Yeshiva of Volozhin, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, the Netziv, we just call him. The Netziv, that's his initials. The Netziv, and then Netziv is one of the great but 1800s Torah commentators. And he has now, this is where, I said I'd speak a little in political theory. He kind of uses this term to create for us two models of leadership, okay? And let's see how we can apply them then to Avram. So let's take a look at this. I'm very excited to share this with you today. This piece here is what we'll end on. Okay, Nasi Elohim, a chief of God. That's an interesting phrase, okay? Yesh shnei minei gdula vehanhaga. There are two types of greatness and leadership. There is Aleph, manhig hamidina bechokhma v'nikra nasi. Someone who leads a state, and a state probably is not the right word. That's like, that word hasn't come up yet, but that's the word that the Netziv is using. Medina, meaning like a country. Maybe a country, a state, something like that. But one who leads a state with wisdom is called a chief. Nasi. Okay. But number two, manhig anshe haolam binyei elokut, but one who leads people in the world in matters of divinity. In other words, a spiritual leader connecting a person or a nation to its God. Ish ve'uma b'shem elokav. This leader, v'yikra ish Elohim. This leader is called a man of God. Now, here he is being very precise with the terminology because this is another phrase we find in Tanakh. Moses is referred to as Ish Elohim, a man of God. Elijah is referred to again and again as Ish Elohim, a man of God. Okay? So he's right to say there's another term out there that we might have expected the people of the Hittites to call Avram, and that was, you're a man of God. You're a spiritual leader. You're a guru. You're a Rebbe. So we respect you. You might have expected they would say, well, we want to give you any land that you want because you're a holy man. But that isn't what they say. And so the Netziv says, you might have expected Ish Elohim, but instead it says Nasi Elohim. You might have expected man of God, but instead it says chief of God. That phrase is telling you that there are two qualities at play. So let's see, just from that phrasing, what the Netziv builds out here. Okay, but our father Avraham was distinguished in both of these roles. Okay, he was a nasi, someone who who could lead a state with wisdom. And a state is a little bit confusing here, but it's like a political leadership. Okay, so he had that quality, but he also was a man of God. So Avram was distinguished in both of these roles. And then the Netziv, who is kind of known for his breadth in Torah. He knows everything. So he finds just the right piece of Talmud to speak to his point here. It's just like pulls out of his hat this really interesting and kind of perfect piece of Talmud. It says in Bava Batra, in the Talmud, this is like what is brought in Bava Batra at the end of the chapter, Hasfina. The chapter is actually called The Ship, so that's kind of interesting. Here's what it says. When Avram died, everyone gathered around him and said, and this is what they said, Oy le'olam she'ibed manhigo v'oy l'sfina she'ibda, and I don't know exactly how to pronounce this word, but kavranita, I think. Woe to the world that has lost its leader, and woe to the ship that has lost its captain. Okay, that just sounds like some flourish, right? Like, oh, Avram said, woe to the world that has lost its leader, and woe to the ship that has lost its captain. But of course, a Talmudic scholar is thinking, wait, why is it both a world that has lost its leader and a ship that has lost its captain? This must refer to two different kinds of leadership. This refers to two kinds of leadership, he says. For a world leader, the manhig ha'olam, it is important that he has wisdom and understanding and other virtues. Okay? A real leader, we hope, is wise. Maybe we also hope is righteous. But we also hope is, psychologically intuitive. But someone who's a real leader, we want them to have intelligence. Whereas a ship's captain must be well trained in certain skills, but need not be particularly wise. Okay, ship captain has a skill. You don't need your airline pilot to be a super genius, but you better hope that he or she is a super genius at flying a plane, right? Like that's what you want. You want them to know their skill. As the phrase goes, you have one job. That's their job. They have to land the plane. Okay. In that sense, when a world leader dies, it's a more difficult loss than a ship's captain. Because the world leader is possessing wisdom, the power is much greater and more significant. But on the other hand, when a world leader dies, the world does not immediately collapse. Okay? That's an interesting point. You may be thrown into great crisis when suddenly the leader of a major country dies, but it's not like everybody then suddenly dies. It's like you have to figure it out. Whereas when a ship's captain dies, Masha'inkin ibed kavranit shel hasfina, when the captain dies, hasfina bisakana, then the ship is in real danger. Okay, so that's like that. That's the That's like the pros and cons, the advantages and disadvantages of these two models of leadership. On the one hand, we think of a world leader or a political leader as someone who really has to be smart and sophisticated and capable. Whereas a ship's captain, that's a smaller kind of leader, but like, what they need to know is how to drive a ship. They don't need to be, no offense to ship's captains, but they don't need to be wise, is what he says here. Okay. On the other hand, if the wisest leader of a country dies, you'll find another leader. But if the ship's captain dies, you're on the boat, you're in trouble. Okay? So this is just like interesting way to think about two different kinds of leadership. Now, what does it mean that Avram was both of these things? And now, like the Nitziv says something that I didn't expect. Okay, he takes these two paradigms, but he merges them in a way that I want you to help me make sense of this. Okay, so let's see what he says. He says, so they said about our father Avraham that when he died, there were two losses. For in matters of political leadership, he was an extremely wise leader. B'hanhagat hamedina haya kmo manhid chacham na'aleh. But in matters of spiritual leadership, he was like a ship's captain. Okay. V'hanhagat avodat Elohim haya kavranit lisfina. I don't know exactly what to mean. It's not where I expected him to go with this. Avram had political leadership and spiritual leadership, and those are two different things. But political leadership, you need wisdom for. The ship's captain, it almost sounded like we were saying, we were being insulting to the ship. Oh, you don't need to be wise. But actually, now it turns out the ship's captain is analogous to Avram's spiritual leadership. What does that mean? Where, so to speak, you don't need to be wise. You don't need to be particularly brilliant to be a spiritual leader. I'm just trying to finish the thought here. What you need is you need to know how to do it. Just like steering a ship. You need to know this particular skill, which is how to connect people to God. Avram had political savvy. He was wise in the ways of the world, but he also had the specific ability to captain the spiritual ship, so to speak. Okay, now I want to hear what you think, what you make of that, because now we're saying something about who Avram was. Who was Avram, that he was both negotiating with political leaders and seemed to have that kind of status, and at the same time, fundamentally, he was known for being a man of God. So let's just finish the piece, and then I'll be curious to hear what you make of it. So here, and let's not forget, he read it into the words of the verse. So here, when it says, you are a chief, that was in reference to his leadership in worldly political matters. But he did not do this on the strength of wisdom alone. Rather, he was a chief of God and did it all for God's sake. Okay, this ending makes it seem like he didn't do this of a lo b'koach hachokma levad. It wasn't just the strength of his wisdom alone. Ela nasi Elohim. He was also a chief of God. B'shem Elokut. He did it for God's sake. So that actually, it started to sound like what the Nitziv was saying is like Avram had two different skill sets. One was political leadership and one was spiritual leadership. But now it starts to sound like actually what Avram was he was both at once. He was a chief of God, which means that he had political savvy, but he used that to accomplish the goal of keeping the ship of God afloat. Right? He did it for God. So he was using both of them one, not wisdom alone, but wisdom and spiritual leadership blended in one. That was what was unique about God. And that's why he was called a chief of God. Okay. It was unique about Avram. I think I said God there. What was unique about Avram, and that's why he was called the chief of God. Okay. What do you think of this? What do you think of these models? What do you think about the contrast between the spiritual and political leader and the account of Avram as both at once? Okay. Let's hear from Dale.
I just see multi-talented focus in terms of being able to put them together and achieve what he needed to achieve. Like I said, I see multi-talented relationship. Some people have one talent, some people have 3 or 4 talents. He had 2. So I think he was a multi-talented person in terms of what he was working on and working for.
Yeah, that's good. Good. I think that's right. I think that part of what the thrust of this commentary is that Avram was unique, that he was like multifaceted and had multiple like skill sets and leadership qualities in one. Okay, so that's certainly a part of it.
Yeah.
David Schwartz.
I'm muting myself, sorry. So there's a quote that actually goes to theater, but I'm going to bring it back for a second. I think it was Barbara Streisand who said that amateurs do it till they get it right, and professionals do it until nothing can go wrong. And in looking at the captain, it's not that the captain simply needs to be able to land the plane. The captain needs to be so attuned and with the situation that nothing can go wrong, because he is given, or she is given, the safety of the souls on board. And in the same way, Avraham, as a spiritual leader, is responsible for the souls, and for bringing that to bear. And yes, that multi-dimensional approach of the different kinds of leadership are there. But I think that belittling the captain is an incorrect, is it can be
You
read
belittle the
differently.
captain at your peril, right? Literally.
Quite literally. I mean,
Yeah.
we'll go to the Hudson, as an example.
That's great. That's great, David. You said more directly, I think something that the Nesiv was sort of circling around or alluding to when he contrasts the advantages and disadvantages of each model. He just says the boat is in danger. But I think part of what he's saying, and David is articulating it so well, is that, yeah, we expect a world leader to be a hyper capable person, someone who is operating at a very high level of intelligence and savvy. And, there are reasons that people ascend to leadership. But the reason the ship's captain is the analogy is that there's a different kind of leadership where, yeah, we don't expect them to be multifaceted, but the leadership that we do expect them to have, the skill that we do expect them to have, is vital. And in that moment, is more vital than anything else. Okay? And so, to draw the analogy, Avram has some of that, generalized leadership quality. But he knows how to do the thing that is life or death. He knows how to keep you alive in the moment that you need it, because he's someone who connects you to God, and that's the most important thing. So thanks for articulating, because I think that's important. The world leader, the world leader, to paraphrase another old saying, the world leader knows many things, but the ship's captain knows one important thing. Right? And that's the most important thing if you're on the boat. Okay. And Avram, it is being suggested, he had both of those qualities. He was kind of like a dynamic political leader, but he actually held the most essential, the critical quality of spiritual leadership. Okay. All right. Let's see. Anyone who hasn't spoken yet want to say something before we close? Ilana Zimmerman.
Just following up on, hi, first of all, thank you for everything. But following up to what you just said, I'm wondering if that leadership of Abraham's, if, by the fact that everybody referred to him, oh, you're a man of God, we should just give you everything. And Abraham, hearing that, realizes this isn't an entitlement, this is a responsibility. So the way that I conduct myself ongoing with this conversation, this negotiation, is not just a business deal, not just a leader, of a nation with power, but as a man of God who has to represent the values that he is living as a chief of God.
Good, good. That's very well said, and helps us, I think, to come to a close here, because after all, okay, great. Avram had both qualities. He was just multi-talented. What is the implication there? What is important for us in considering Avram's kind of unique role as a leader in Genesis, interacting with other leaders? And when we say that Avram had both political savvy and spiritual leadership qualities, so we're saying two important things that might not have been so obvious. One is that, Yeah, okay. It would have been nice if for Avram just to be like a very spiritual guy, but he needed to have political savvy. In this landscape, it wasn't enough for Avram to just be a holy man. He had to know how to negotiate, how to. Avram heard and he understood what was really going on behind the scenes. He was smart, he was sharp, he could negotiate, he could buy the plot of land. He knew, like, he knew what to do. So that's part of the message here is that Genesis, the landscape of Genesis, is not a place where you can just go around basking in the glory of God. No, you need to know how to negotiate in real political human situations. That's one point, and it's an important point. But Ilana makes the other important point, and we might have missed this, that it also wouldn't be enough if Avram just had political savvy. If we just found, wow, Avram really knows how to negotiate. Boy, he really tricked that guy. That wouldn't be the Avram that we would want to look up to. The idea here is that if he was both in one, he negotiated politically, but he did so with God in mind. So he did so with mission in mind. He did so with ethics in mind. He did so with justice in mind. He carried with him principles that were associated with God and with divinity, even as he was negotiating these very tense, real world, price of land kind of issues. He was still a man of God. He was still a man of God. And so he wasn't trying to trick anyone. He was just like, I understand that it's important for me to have a claim to this land. That's the politically savvy part. But I also understand, like, I've just got to pay the right rate. I'll give them whatever they say. There should be no funny business here. That's the sort of, I want them to still, I don't want to create spiritual rupture. I bring ethics and spirituality even to my political negotiations. Halavai that we had such leaders in the world today. Halavai that we had leaders who were not only politically savvy, but spiritually whole. May we have leaders like Avram once again. We'll end it there. Wishing you a good rest of your week and a good Shabbos, and I'll talk to you next week.